It's now time for a closer look with the monitor. I'm Craig Blumenshine from Prairie Public. It's our weekly visit with reporters from the North Dakota Monitor, bringing context and accountability to the stories shaping North Dakota. And of course, you can read all of the Monitor's reporting anytime you would like at northdakotamonitor.com. It's free from subscriptions or paywalls. And today we're visiting with Jacob Orlich about transparency in state government and his reporting that 6 North Dakota legislators failed to file required financial disclosure forms. It comes as those disclosures have been made available online for free and as lawmakers continue expanding reporting requirements. Jacob, welcome back to a closer look with the Monitor.
Thanks for having me on, Craig.
Jacob, let's start with the headline. What did you find regarding these 6 legislators and their disclosure forms?
Well, as I was reviewing the statements of interest, the financial disclosures of state officials in North Dakota, I discovered that there were 6 sitting lawmakers in the North Dakota legislature who had not filed their statement of interest this year, missing the new annual filing deadline on January 31st. And this review was occurring several weeks ago, so they were nearly 3 months past the deadline at that point.
What exactly are these financial disclosure forms, Jacob, and why are they required?
So financial disclosures are something that elected and appointed officials have to fill out, essentially to help people identify what might be a conflict of interest. In North Dakota, we call these personal financial disclosure forms a statement of interests. This is not the same thing as campaign finance reporting. So this does not have to do with campaign contributions or expenditures. These are the disclosures that tell the public what a given candidate, lawmaker, member of a board, or state official like the governor have in terms of financial interests, associations with organizations, and other categories.
So then this information is the kind of information that the public or watchdogs are then able to see.
Yes, essentially, it's a standardized disclosure that everyone has to fill out, and therefore the public has the same level of information, theoretically, on everybody who is representing them in the legislature, on these boards, in statewide office.
You also reported that these records are now available online for free. How significant is that change for transparency?
It is a significant change. And I say that as a reporter, as somebody who routinely examines these documents, looking for information and checking that they were filled out correctly. To be able to access every statement of interest online is, dare I say, a game changer. And the reason they are now online is a law was passed in the 2025 legislative session directing the Secretary of State's office to do so. The Secretary of State's office, which is the filing agency these documents are filed with, this office created this website and starting this year began uploading all statements of interest and other documents like campaign finance documents to this website, making it publicly available at the touch of a button. Prior to this year, you typically had to make an open records request for a specific document or a specific group of documents. And while that was a relatively easy process working with the Secretary of State's office, it is still significantly more accessible when they're posted online in the first place.
Jacob, what happens then when a legislator fails to file? Are there penalties or enforcement mechanisms that are then in place?
Yes, so there's multiple parts to that question. First, you have to understand that there are 2 different requirements at play here. Prior to this year, the only time an elected or appointed official was required to file a statement of interest was when they were first appointed to a board or when they were first filing for election. So legislators, for example, would only have to file a statement of interest every 4 years when they ran for election and re-election. Beginning this year, legislators, boards, and statewide officers had to begin filing these statements of interest annually. The deadline for that annual filing was January 31st. As far as consequences go, generally speaking, there are a few different consequences that could happen. Late filings of these statements of interest. Well, for candidates, if you don't file your statements of interest in time, you don't appear on the ballot. For sitting lawmakers who have to comply with that annual filing requirement now, there will be late fees attached to any late filing. Uh, those late fees were waived by the Secretary of State's office for these 6 lawmakers who missed the deadline this year. And that is because it is a new annual filing requirement and it is a new system online where they have to file these electronically. So the Secretary of State's office decided to give these late filers a grace period, essentially, that they're assuming there might be some errors in the first year of operation. Beginning next year, there will be late fines up to $100, depending on how late it is. There are also other potential consequences that are laid out in the state law governing statements of interest. One of those potential consequences is if errors are discovered on a statement of interest, potentially a candidate's name could be kept off a ballot. There are also potentially more serious consequences towards the end of the state law that governs these statements of interest. The Attorney General and state's attorneys are charged with investigating any potential intentional violations of that law. And there are no specifics in state law as to what constitutes intentional or what mistakes would rise to the level that these consequences would come into play. But theoretically, the Attorney General's office could seek to essentially void a nomination, an appointment, or an election. So there are theoretically some very serious consequences to not following this state law.
Enjoying my conversation with Jacob Orlich. He's a reporter with the North Dakota Monitor. This is our weekly conversation we call A Closer Look with the Monitor. Today we're talking about transparency in state government and his reporting that 6 North Dakota legislators failed to file required financial disclosure forms. Jacob, do we know why these particular lawmakers didn't file? Is it oversight? Is it resistance? Is it something else?
I spoke to all 6 lawmakers who did not file a financial disclosure by the January 31st deadline. There was no resistance. There was no opposition to filing it. The general response appeared to be that it was an oversight. Either the lawmakers were under the impression that they had filed the statement of interest at the same time they filed their campaign finance reporting, because the 2 documents, the 2 disclosures share the same deadline on January 31st. Others were of the impression that they were not required to file the statement of interest annually because they are not seeking re-election this year. So there were a variety of responses, but they all indicated a willingness to file it late once they were notified that the requirement applied to them.
Are those missing filings, have they been submitted?
The majority of them have. Most of them were filed. I believe 3 of them were filed within a matter of hours or days after I reached out to those lawmakers. One other has been filed earlier this week, I believe I saw, and 2 others. So 2 of the 6 I have not seen yet on the Secretary of State's website. So I'm not sure what the delay is there, but all 6 indicated a willingness to file it late.
What's new with financial reporting requirements this year?
Well, there's a couple of new requirements, and we've touched on several of them. One of the big ones is everything is online. So that is a big change for accessibility by the public. Another new requirement this year is that annual filing deadline. So everybody has to file on an annual basis between January 1st and January 31st as to their financial interests in the prior year. The 2025 legislature added a new section to the form. This section requires anybody who files a statement of interest to disclose the fact that they sold more than $5,000 of goods or services to a government agency or political subdivision like a county, if that sale came from a business that they own more than 10% interest in. So there are some narrow requirements on what payments are required to be disclosed, but that is a new requirement effective this year.
Jacob, how does North Dakota compare to other states when it comes to disclosure or transparency rules?
North Dakota generally has fewer financial disclosure requirements. And I'm talking personal financial disclosure requirements, not campaign finance reporting. But North Dakota generally has fewer requirements for those personal financial disclosures than other states. The change to require annual filings is a big improvement. It brings North Dakota into line with the vast majority of states in the country. Uh, Many states also require more detail as to what is needs to be disclosed. Many states also require more detail as to what needs to be disclosed. One ethics and transparency advocate that I spoke to a few years ago for a related story said that North Dakota had quote unquote clearly inadequate disclosure. So that is the sense I've gotten from speaking to national experts on this issue.
Is there a broader concern, Jacob, here about conflicts of interest or public trust?
Potentially. One of the ways that the public, that the voters can become aware of conflicts of interest or perceived conflicts of interest or even potential conflicts of interest down the road when they're deciding whether to elect somebody is through disclosures like these. So if somebody spots a financial interest in a company or a financial relationship with a government agency, they are then able to monitor the elected officials' actions in relation to that company or that agency to see if a potential conflict of interest emerges down the road. It's not an exact science. And of course, every voter may feel differently about that. But in theory, that is what these financial disclosures are supposed to accomplish.
So what you're saying then is for everyday North Dakotans, this shouldn't matter. These disclosures are used to discover potential conflicts of interest, which could be important because of varying types of legislation that comes before the legislature.
Yes, that's exactly right. But right now, I'd like to throw out the other side of the argument here, and that is a lot of legislators will explain to you that they're part of a citizen legislature. These are people who serve the state in their role for primarily for 4 or 5 months every 2 years. The rest of the time, they are an everyday citizen. They have their own jobs. They have their own financial interests. It's a little bit different from states where somebody's a full time legislator or even a part time legislator who works 6 months out of every year, who works for the state 6 months out of every year. So there is that dynamic at play with a citizen legislature. The legislators will often tell you that it's inevitable that there's going to be conflicts. And on some votes, if you invalidated the votes of everyone who had a borderline conflict, potentially it wouldn't be feasible to pass legislation on certain topics. So there is that perspective to be taken into account.
Who's the watchdog for this? Theoretically, is it the Secretary of State's office? And have they said anything about this matter?
So, who the watchdog is on statements of interest is a tricky question. Uh, the Secretary of State's office says that they are a filing agency and typically not a compliance agency. So, they are not necessarily checking that the contents of a statement of interest are accurate or verifying any information in there. They do check that candidates file a statement of interest because that is a requirement for somebody to get their name on an election ballot. They were not checking this year to see if sitting legislators had met the new annual filing requirement, the deadline for which was January 31st. The state law governing statements of interest charges state's attorneys in each county and the Attorney General's office with investigating and enforcing alleged violations of that state law. Beyond that, I'm not aware of any other state agency or government entity that enforces that law.
For North Dakotans who want to view these forms, where should they go?
They can go to the Secretary of State's website. If they look under the Elections tab, there should be a Statements of Interest webpage, and there is a link there that can bring you to the online system where all the Statements of Interest, starting on January 1st of this year, have been filed and are available for public review.
Jacob, do you anticipate more discussion in terms of future compliance or possible policy changes?
I think it's a little too soon to know for sure, but this general topic has been a matter of discussion in previous legislative sessions, most notably in 2025, when several changes were made, as we've discussed. So I would expect it to come up as a topic of discussion during the 2027 legislative session. To what extent, I'm still not sure on. And of course, other related matters such as campaign finance reporting, I would also expect to be a subject of discussion in the upcoming session. But more immediately, no, there have been no proposed changes that I've been aware of.
That's Jacob Orlich. He's with the North Dakota Monitor. He joins us for a closer look with the Monitor. You can read more about his reporting and explore those newly available financial disclosures at the Secretary of State's office. And of course, you can read Jacob's reporting at the NorthDakotaMonitor.com website, free from subscriptions, free from paywalls. Jacob, thanks for your reporting.
Thanks for having me on here to talk about it, Craig.